Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. Some thoughts start out very small. So small that if you're not paying attention, you might not even notice when they first appear. But if you keep holding them, keep turning them over in your mind, they begin to grow. Not because they're true, but because you've given them too much time and attention. Priya is 28 years old. She works as a data analyst. Her job revolves around numbers, charts, streams of information constantly moving across a screen. That evening, she's sitting on her usual train ride home. The city slides past the window lights, stretching into long streaks. She's wearing noise-canceling headphones, but no music is playing. She just wants things to be a little quieter. In Priya's hand is her phone. The screen is off, but her mind isn't. An email from earlier that afternoon, her reply. A response from a coworker, nothing serious. No criticism, no clear consequences. And yet, in her head, the story keeps replaying, each time with a new detail added. I should have explained that more clearly. What if they think I'm unsure? Maybe I missed something. Each thought arrives small, like the very first snowflake landing in your palm. But Priya doesn't let it melt. She turns it over, thinks more, analyzes more. And before she realizes it, that tiny flake is no longer just a speck. The train stops at a station. Some people get on, others step off. Priya stays seated. She adjusts her scarf, pulling it closer around her neck, even though the car isn't cold. A familiar motion, almost comforting. For a brief moment, she notices her shoulders are a little tense. Not painful, just tight. She lets them drop slowly. No one tells her to. Her body has just been holding that position long enough. As her shoulders lower, her breath deepens slightly. And in that small opening, Priya notices something her thoughts didn't start out big. They became big because she kept rolling them, like a snowball. No one begins with a large one. You start with a tiny handful. But as you roll it across the ground, more snow sticks. The longer you roll, the heavier it becomes, until you can't even remember where it began. Priya looks out the window. A familiar grocery store. A diner with its lights already off. None of what she's seeing has anything to do with that email. But her eyes keep looking, and while they do, her mind loosens its grip on the old story. Not because she's trying to forget, but because something else is being seen. She reaches up and adjusts her headphones, feeling the cool plastic under her fingers. The sensation is clear, immediate, real. For a few seconds, there are no charts, no sentences, just her hand and the object she's touching. And in that moment, the snowball in her mind doesn't grow any bigger. There's something Priya has started to notice on evenings like this. Negative thoughts rarely grow on their own. They need her participation. They need her to return to them. They need all the what-ifs and if-onlys. When she doesn't add more, they don't disappear right away, but they stop expanding. The train keeps moving, its rhythm steady, familiar. Her body slowly relaxes into that motion. She doesn't promise herself she'll never overthink again. She knows that isn't realistic. But maybe just for now, she doesn't need to keep rolling the snowball. Priya slips her phone into her bag, not to avoid it, just because she doesn't need to hold it anymore. Her hands rest on her thighs. She exhales slowly. A thought appears, I'm still thinking. And right after it, a softer realization follows. I'm noticing that I'm thinking. The difference is small. But that small bit of space makes the snowball feel lighter. If you're listening to this and recognize how your thoughts tend to grow in the evening, that's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. You've just been rolling the snowball without realizing it. And tonight, you might not need to push it any farther. Just pause for a moment, set your hands down, and let the snow melt in its own time. As the train nears her stop, Priya stands up out of habit. She isn't rushing. People move toward the doors, step by step. No pushing, no urgency. She follows the flow, letting her body remember the way. When the doors open, cooler air brushes her face, soft, almost gentle, like a reminder that the world outside is still there, no matter how busy her mind has been. Priya walks home from the station. She's taken this route hundreds of times. The same trees along the sidewalk, street lights spaced at regular intervals. Tonight, the yellow light pools onto the pavement in small circles. She moves from one patch of light to the next, not paying attention to whether she's walking fast or slow, just letting her steps find their own rhythm. The snowball in her mind is still there. It hasn't melted completely. The questions from earlier haven't disappeared. But as she walks, they stop growing. There's no new ground for them to pick up more snow. Just steady footsteps and breath moving in and out with that rhythm. Priya pauses at a familiar corner. A small shop is still open, its inside lights brighter than the street. She stands there for a moment, looking through the window. The shopkeeper is quietly restocking shelves, unhurried, in no rush to finish. The scene has nothing to do with her thoughts, but it's real enough to gently pull her attention away from the story in her head. Sometimes negative thoughts don't need to be defeated. They just need to be brought into the light. Like snow, when it stays in the shade, it can hold its shape for a long time. But when sunlight touches it, no one has to break it apart. It melts on its own, little by little. Priya keeps walking. When she reaches her apartment, she doesn't turn on the main lights. She lets the soft glow from the living room guide her in. She hangs up her coat, takes off her scarf, sets her bag down. Each small action feels like setting down another piece of the day. In the kitchen, she pours herself a glass of water. No ice, not too cold. The water touches her throat, cool enough to notice. She stands there taking small sips. For a few seconds, no thought continues. There's just the feeling of the water. The swallow, the brief pause between breaths. Priya notices this when she stops rolling her thoughts. They don't gain any more weight. They might still exist, but they no longer control her. They're like small bits of snow left on a sleeve, something that will melt once it meets warmth. She walks into the bedroom. She doesn't check her email again. She doesn't reread messages, not out of fear, just because right now it isn't necessary. She sits on the edge of the bed, takes off her headphones, and places them on the table. Another object set down. When she lies back, Priya doesn't try to coax herself into sleep. She simply lets her body be still. Her breathing slows. Her shoulders soften. The remaining thoughts drift by, not held onto, not pushed away. They come and they go, like thin clouds passing through the sky. If you're listening to this and still awake, that's okay. Maybe your snowball has grown a little bigger. Maybe it's been rolling all day. You don't need to melt it right now. You only need to stop rolling it further. The night doesn't ask you to find answers. The night only asks you to stop retelling the old story. If you fall asleep at some point, that's natural. If you don't, you're still in a safe place. Just a little warmth, a little light, and the snow will know how to melt on its own. Listen a little longer, or let sleep come whenever it's ready. The wind arrived before Tyler had time to think about it. Not strong, but steady enough to make the wooden cabin creak softly, as if the place were breathing along with the forest. Tyler sat in a chair by the window. A flashlight hung from a metal hook above the work desk, its warm yellow light swaying gently with the movement of the air. He was 34, a park ranger used to narrow trails. Uneven ground, small changes most people never noticed. But that night, after his shift had ended, after the forest had gone dark, after no one needed him to make decisions anymore, a familiar sense of unsteadiness showed up in its own quiet way. Tyler reached for the flashlight and adjusted the angle of the head. A familiar motion. The beam shifted slightly, then settled. There was no perfect position, only one that was good enough for now. He thought about an afternoon a few weeks earlier, standing on a wooden bridge stretched over a ravine. The wind had been stronger that day. The bridge had trembled lightly beneath his feet. He'd had to adjust every step, every breath, not to stay still, but to keep moving across. At the time, he hadn't called the feeling fear. It was simply attention pulled fully into each small movement. Now inside the cabin, that feeling returned, not because of height, not because of immediate danger, but because of questions without clear answers. Work, where to live, choices coming up ahead. Nothing was falling apart, but nothing was settled either. Like a rope stretched between 2 points, always asking the person walking it to make constant adjustments. Tyler set the flashlight down on the desk. The soft sound of metal touching wood filled the room. He leaned back in the chair and let his shoulders drop. An old habit inside him wanted to find perfect balance first, to make sure everything was stable before allowing himself to rest. But the forest had never taught him that. The forest had taught him that staying upright doesn't mean staying still. The wind moved again. The flashlight beam wobbled slightly. Tyler didn't fix it right away. He let it tilt, then find a new resting place on its own. The light still filled the room. Not perfectly, but enough. Some fears come from believing that balance is a destination. That if we find the exact right position, the exact right decision, the exact right rhythm, everything will stop shaking. But life rarely stays still long enough for that. It keeps shifting like the wind outside, like the trees that sway and bend while staying rooted. Tyler stood and took a few steps across the small cabin. The wooden floor made its familiar sounds beneath him. He cracked the window open slightly. Cold air rushed in, carrying the damp scent of leaves and soil. He breathed in slowly, then let it out. Not trying to hold balance, just letting his body adjust on its own. In his mind, the image of a tightrope walker appeared clearly. Not a performer in a circus, but anyone trying to move through an uncertain stretch of life. That person isn't standing still on the rope. Every second brings tiny corrections, leaning left, leaning right, stepping forward, stepping back, half a step. There's no moment that feels finished. Tyler realized he'd once believed that needing to adjust meant something was wrong. That if he were still correcting, he wasn't okay yet. But long patrols through the forest had taught him otherwise. Constant adjustment was a sign of life. A tree doesn't survive wind by staying rigid. It bends, yields, and then returns. He went back to the chair and sat down again. This time he didn't lean all the way back. He sat closer to the edge, feet planted firmly on the floor. The sense of contact was clear. Not to lock himself into a fixed state, but to feel where he was right here, right now. For a brief moment, Tyler noticed that his fear wasn't about falling. It was about not knowing which way to lean. And once he saw that, the pressure eased. Because if there's no single perfect direction, then every small adjustment matters. Outside, the wind softened. The flashlight beam nearly stilled. Tyler didn't rush to feel relieved. He knew the wind could return at any time, but he also knew he didn't have to wait for it to disappear completely in order to rest. He placed his hands on his thighs and let them stay there. His breathing evened out. Not deeper, not longer, just steady. Maybe balance isn't something you achieve and then hold forever. Maybe it's the act of continuing forward, even while the rope is still gently moving beneath your feet. The night in the forest didn't stand still, but it knew how to balance itself. The wind moved through, then settled like a long breath finally released after a full day. Tyler sat quietly in the cabin. The soft rattle of the window was gone now. What remained were distant sounds, insects' leaves brushing against each other, tiny noises that usually went unnoticed during the day. He stood up and turned off one of the lights. The room dimmed the edges of things no longer clearly defined. Tyler didn't turn on another lamp. He let his eyes adjust to this new level of darkness. He didn't need to see everything clearly to know where he was. The wooden floor still made gentle sounds beneath his feet as he walked. He moved more slowly now, not because he was afraid of stumbling, but because there was no need to rush. It felt different from the times he'd tried so hard to stay balanced before. Back then his body had tensed, as if any movement meant failure. Now each small sway felt like part of a larger motion. Tyler opened the door to the porch. He didn't step all the way outside. He stayed at the threshold where the light from inside met the darkness beyond. The air was cooler, the breeze light. He rested his hand on the wooden doorframe, feeling its familiar roughness. There are moments in life when we think we need a clear decision to make everything stable. And then there are moments when the only thing required is a series of very small adjustments, just enough not to fall. Not moving forward too fast, not stepping too far back, simply staying where you are. Tyler remembered the first time he learned how to cross a suspension bridge in the forest. The instructor hadn't told him to stand still. They told him to look ahead, keep his breathing steady, and accept that the bridge would sway. Swaying wasn't a sign of danger. It was a sign of flexibility. He stepped back inside and closed the door. The cabin became quiet again. The flashlight hanging from the hook was still tilted at a slight angle. Tyler didn't adjust it. He let it stay that way. The light was still enough, and its unevenness no longer bothered him. He sat back down in the chair this time, leaning fully into it. His body found its position without effort. His feet rested firmly on the floor, not because everything had become stable, but because he was no longer resisting movement. In the image of the Tightrope Walker, what matters isn't never wobbling. It's that each time the body sways, the person knows how to move with it, then return. No panic, no stiffness, no need to prove control. Tyler's breathing slowed without him noticing when it happened. Not intentionally deep, just slower. Like the rhythm of the forest once night has fully settled. Thoughts still appeared now and then, but they didn't demand immediate action. They passed through like the wind outside, arriving, then leaving. He placed a hand on his chest and felt his heartbeat steady. Not fast, not slow. Just the heart of someone resting after a long day. A quiet trust formed that he didn't need to resolve everything before allowing himself to stop. The wind might return later. Tomorrow the questions might still be there, But right now, there was no rope to cross, no height to look down from. Just a cabin, a person breathing, and a moment safe enough to rest. Tyler closed his eyes, not to fall asleep yet, just to let his eyelids grow heavy. The dim light of the flashlight softened, then faded into something no longer clearly seen. Balance, it turned out, wasn't about everything being still. It was about trusting that adjustment is possible, even when you don't need to make one right now. The night held the rest for him. Some bursts of anger arrive so fast that we don't even realize we're angry yet. A brief interruption, an unexpected movement, a tiny sense of being crossed, and suddenly the chest tightens, the hands clench, and the mind starts building a story. We believe someone did something wrong, that someone deserves blame. But sometimes what we collide with is just an empty boat. Jason was 23, a senior in college, still getting used to driving on the freeway every day. That night, he left the library later than planned. It was fully dark now, streetlights stretching ahead like an endless stream of light. Jason turned on his signal, merged into traffic, and tried to keep just enough distance so he wouldn't have to brake hard. A car in front of him suddenly cut into his lane. No signal, no warning. Jason jolted his foot, hitting the brake harder than necessary. His heart jumped. A familiar rush of heat surged up. What kind of driving is that? The thought flashed through his mind before anything else could. He gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the car ahead. For a few short seconds, Jason's world shrank down to that one vehicle. He imagined the driver's face, imagined carelessness, imagined disrespect. With each image, the anger sharpened a little more. Then traffic slowed. The space between cars widened. Jason's breathing slowed with it without him trying. As the red glow of brake lights reflected across the windshield, he noticed how tightly he was holding the wheel. His fingers had gone pale. His shoulders were raised higher than usual. He loosened his grip just a little, not to forgive anyone, just because his hands were tired. And in that very small moment, another thought slipped in. What if there was no one in that car to be angry at? What if it had simply drifted across without intention, without malice, without aiming at him at all? That thought didn't erase the anger right away, but it interrupted the story in Jason's head, like speaking quickly and suddenly forgetting the next word. There was a gap, and in that gap, he noticed something. He was angry at an image his own mind had created. The car ahead kept going. It didn't look back. It didn't react. There was no sign it knew what Jason was thinking. Maybe the driver was exhausted. Maybe distracted by something else. Maybe it was just a moment of carelessness, or maybe there was nothing to it at all, just two paths crossing briefly, then moving on. Jason looked at the flow of cars around him. Each one had lights. Each one was moving. But he knew nothing about the people inside. He didn't know what kind of day they'd had, what they were carrying in their minds, or whether someone among them was angry at him for something equally small. He breathed in, then out. Not deep, not long. Just enough for the tightness in his chest to ease. The heat didn't spread anymore, It was still there, but it wasn't growing like a fire, no longer being fed. There was an old story Jason remembered from a life skills class about a boat drifting on a river. When two boats collide, if you see the other boat is empty, you don't get angry. But if you believe someone is steering it, anger rises immediately. Not because of the collision itself, but because of the idea that someone did this to you. Jason didn't think of it as a lesson. He just felt it happening right now on this road in his own body. The lane change was already over, but the anger had only just begun, and now it was beginning to slow. He turned on the radio, then turned it off right away. The sound wasn't needed. Tonight, the steady engine noise and the slow flow of lights were enough. Jason let the car move with traffic, no faster, no slower, just staying in his lane. Sometimes we don't need to win a moment. We don't need someone else to admit fault. We just need to see that what we ran into might not have had anyone there to be angry at in the first place. And if that's true, why keep holding the anger at all? Jason kept driving, freeway lights stretching out ahead. The story in his head was no longer racing. It had settled, giving way to a strange but comfortable space. Traffic gradually thinned as Jason exited the freeway. The smaller roads leading back to his neighborhood were much quieter, streetlights spaced farther apart, their light falling in short patches across the asphalt. The alertness from earlier was gone. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, not gripping just enough to keep the car steady. The anger had slipped somewhere behind him now, like a car that had taken a different turn. It hadn't disappeared completely. It just wasn't right in front of him anymore. When it no longer had to be watched, it naturally began to lose its sharp edges. Jason noticed his breathing had evened out. Not because he was trying to calm down, but because there was no longer a story to keep running. No one needed to be right. No one needed to be wrong. There was only the road opening ahead and the ordinary movement of driving home. He stopped at an intersection. Red light, yellow, green. The changes happened steadily, indifferent to the mood of anyone waiting. Jason watched the colors shift and felt something inside him shift too slowly without being pushed. When he pulled up in front of his apartment, he turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. Not because he was thinking about anything, just because this moment was calm enough to stay in for a few extra seconds. The metal cooled. The space around the car closed in like a small cocoon. Jason opened the door and stepped out. The night air was cooler, brushing lightly against his skin. He locked the car, heard the short beep, and walked away. He didn't look back at the road he had just traveled. There was no need. Inside the small room, he turned on the desk lamp. The soft yellow light was gentle enough not to fully wake him up. Jason set his keys on the table and dropped his backpack on the floor. Everything landed where it belonged, without needing adjustment. There was a quiet comfort in realizing that not every moment requires a reaction. He washed his hands, the water running steadily, a familiar feeling. The water carried away road dust, fatigue, and the faint leftover trace of anger. Jason let it run a few seconds longer, then turned off the faucet. No ritual. Just the end of an action. When he lay down on the bed, he didn't think about the other car anymore. He didn't think about himself in that moment either. The images had lost their weight. They didn't need to be held onto to prove anything. Some collisions don't need to be carried all the way to the end of the day. Jason turned onto his side, finding his usual position. The blanket came up to his shoulders. The room was quiet with no sudden sound. And he noticed something very simple. Anger needs an object to hold on to. When the object dissolves, anger has nowhere left to cling. The empty boat had passed long ago. The river kept flowing. Nothing was broken. Nothing needed fixing. There had only been a moment that ended and a body that didn't need to keep carrying it. Jason closed his eyes. He didn't force himself to sleep. He let his eyes rest. His breath moved in and out, steady and light. No intention, no plan, no reaction required. If more collisions come tomorrow, that's okay. We don't always remember that the boat might be empty, but tonight, just having seen it once was enough for his body to relearn what it feels like not to be angry. The room settled into silence. No conclusion, no reminder, just a slow current guiding everything back to its place. And within that current, sleep arrived very gently, as if it had been there all along, simply waiting until no one was colliding with anyone anymore. There are nights when loneliness doesn't feel sharp. It feels quiet, like a room with the lights off, where you can still sense the outlines of everything, but nothing reaches back. Grace knew that kind of quiet well. She was 62, a librarian in a small town, the kind of person who moved through the day, gently returning books to their places, speaking softly, keeping things in order without making a show of it. People liked her. People trusted her. But most days, by the time she locked the library doors and drove home, the world's attention felt like it had already moved on to somewhere else. That evening, she didn't turn on the TV. She didn't scroll her phone. She made a cup of tea and carried it out to the porch, where a single porch light glowed warm against the dark. The air was cool enough to wake the skin, but not cold enough to hurt. Somewhere, crickets kept their steady rhythm. A neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped as if even it didn't want to disturb the night for too long. Grace sat down on the porch steps, teacup warming her hands. The chair beside her stayed empty, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, ordinary way that empty chairs can be. A few years ago, the empty chair had felt unbearable. She would notice it immediately, like a missing tooth. Now it simply existed, a fact, a shape in the room. Still, sometimes she wondered what her life looked like from the outside. Quiet job, quiet house, quiet evenings. She didn't feel sad all the time. She didn't feel broken. She just felt unseen. Not by one person in particular, not in a way that could be fixed with a text message. More like the feeling that if she disappeared from the world for a few days, the world would continue without much pause. Grace took a slow sip of tea. It was too hot, and she smiled at herself for forgetting that part. She set the cup down beside her and rubbed her thumb over the rim, feeling the smooth ceramic. Across the small yard near the fence line, something pale caught her eye. A faint patch of color in the dark. She leaned forward, squinting. Earlier that week, she had thrown a handful of mixed seeds into the soil near the fence, not really expecting anything. A neighbor had mentioned wildflowers offhand, saying they made the yard feel less lonely. Grace had nodded politely, then bought a small packet at the hardware store on her way home from work. She hadn't told anyone. It wasn't a project. It wasn't self-improvement. It was just a small thing to do with her hands. Now, in the porch light and the thin moonlight, she could see that something had actually grown. A few small flowers had opened simple, bright faces, looking up into the dark as if the night didn't bother them at all. Grace stood up slowly and walked into the yard, careful not to step on the little patch of new life. The grass was cool under her feet. The earth smelled damp, honest. She crouched near the flowers and looked closer. They weren't dramatic flowers. Not the kind people buy at expensive shops. Not roses, not orchids. These were the kind that show up in empty lots, along highways in places no one points at. And yet here they were, open, bright, completely unconcerned with whether anyone noticed. Grace felt something loosen in her chest. Not a big release, just a softening, as if a tight knot had been sitting there quietly and finally stopped pulling. She stayed crouched there looking at them. The petals were delicate, slightly uneven. The stems thin but upright. They didn't look like they were trying to be anything else. It struck her in the simplest way that they hadn't grown to be admired. They had grown because that's what they do. Grace thought about how often she measured her own life by outside signals, invitations, messages, praise at work, people remembering her birthday, people needing her. And when those signals didn't come, she assumed something about herself. Maybe I'm not interesting. Maybe I'm not important. Maybe I'm not enough. The wildflowers didn't seem to ask those questions. They didn't bend toward applause. They didn't wait for permission. They simply opened. Grace reached out and touched one petal with the tip of her finger. It was cool and soft, almost weightless. The flower didn't flinch. It didn't change its mind. It remained what it was. A car passed far away, headlights sweeping faintly across the fence. Then the darkness returned to its steady shape. Grace sat back on her heels and let herself breathe. In and out, slow, natural breaths that didn't ask anything from her. She realized she had been living as if her value depended on being witnessed, as if beauty required an audience, as if a life only mattered when someone else reflected it back to her. But the small patch of wildflowers didn't need a mirror. Grace stood up and went back to the porch. She picked up her tea again, now warm instead of hot. She sat down on the step and looked out at the yard. The empty chair was still empty. The night was still quiet. And yet something felt different. Not in the circumstances, in her chest. She didn't feel fixed. She didn't feel suddenly fulfilled. She just felt less needy for proof. The wildflowers continued to hold their small brightness in the dark, like a gentle reminder you didn't have to fight for your own worth. Sometimes Grace thought the most honest kind of beauty is the kind that keeps blooming even when no one is watching. And maybe that kind of blooming was allowed for her too. Grace stayed on the porch for a long while after that, long enough for the night to deepen around her. The crickets settled into a slower rhythm. The air cooled just enough that she pulled her sweater closer around her shoulders. Not because she was cold, but because the weight felt comforting. She watched the small patch of wildflowers from where she sat. They were harder to see now, their colors muted in the dark, but she knew they were still there, still open, still doing what they had done all day without interruption. Grace noticed how often she had lived as if she were on pause, waiting for someone to notice her effort, waiting for an invitation, waiting for a sign that her life was meaningful in some measurable way. She had waited quietly, politely, the way she had learned to do most things. But sitting there now, she realized something gentle and surprising. The waiting itself had been exhausting. Not because it was dramatic, but because it kept her turned outward, scanning for reassurance instead of resting in what already existed. She took another sip of tea and let the warmth spread through her chest. The night didn't rush her. The yard didn't ask her to be different. Even the empty chair beside her felt neutral now, no longer a symbol of lack. Just a piece of furniture holding its place. Grace thought about the wildflowers again. How they had grown without certainty, without feedback, without an audience to tell them they were doing it right. They hadn't bloomed for the night. They had bloomed in it. That difference felt important. She stood up slowly and walked back into the yard, careful with her steps. The grass brushed against her ankles. She stopped near the flowers once more and knelt down, resting her hands on her thighs. Up close, she could see tiny imperfections she hadn't noticed before. A petal with a small tear, a stem slightly bent, a flower that hadn't fully opened yet. None of it looked wrong. Grace felt a quiet recognition move through her. Her own life had been like that too, uneven, unremarkable in places, still unfolding in others. She had spent so much time believing she needed to be more finished, more impressive, more clearly defined. But nothing here looked finished either. Nothing needed to be. She stayed there until her knees began to ache slightly, then rose and brushed the dirt from her palms. The flowers stayed where they were. They didn't need her attention to continue. Back inside, Grace moved through the house without turning on many lights. The familiar rooms felt softer in the dimness, edges less sharp, expectations lower. She washed her cup, listening to the quiet rush of water, then set it upside down to dry. In the bedroom, she paused by the window and looked out once more. The yard was mostly shadow now, the flowers invisible unless you knew where to look. She smiled to herself. So much of life, she realized, was like that. Present, alive, meaningful, whether or not it was clearly seen. Grace lay down and pulled the blanket up around her. The bed held her weight easily. Her breath slowed without instruction. The day, with all its small moments and quiet hours, began to loosen its grip. She didn't make any promises to herself, didn't vow to stop caring what people thought, didn't rewrite her story in her head. She simply let herself rest. Somewhere outside, the wildflowers stood in the dark, open and steady, not asking for approval, not dimming themselves because no one was watching. They would still be there in the morning. And so would she. Grace closed her eyes, carrying that thought with her, not as an affirmation, not as a lesson, but as a soft truth the body could understand. Nothing was missing. Nothing had to be proven. The night wrapped around the house gentle and complete and let everything be exactly as it was. There are days when you wake up feeling like everything is heavier than usual. Not because anything bad has happened. The sky looks the same. Work is still there. People around you are still talking and laughing. But inside, everything feels coated in a dull gray layer. Wherever you look, you notice what's missing, what's wrong, what's tiring. And it becomes easy to believe that this is just how life is. Lily is 47 years old. She works in human resources at a mid-sized company. Her job is to listen to other people's problems, help untangle conflicts, and bring order to complicated situations at work. She's been doing it for years, long enough to get used to staying calm, staying neutral, keeping a steady appearance on the outside. That evening, Lily gets home later than usual. The apartment is quiet. No TV playing, no calls waiting to be returned. She hangs her bag on the hook and walks straight into the bathroom. She doesn't turn on the bright overhead light, just the small lamp by the mirror, enough to see her reflection. She stands there for a moment. The face looking back at her is familiar, but tonight it looks more tired. Not exhausted, just worn in a quiet, accumulated way. The kind of tired that comes from holding everything together all day. Lily reaches up and touches the frame of her glasses. Thin plastic. Familiar in her hand, she takes them off and sets them on the sink. Without her glasses, everything softens slightly. The edges blur. Not sharp, but not uncomfortable either. She turns on the tap. Warm water flows steadily, fogging the mirror with a thin layer of steam. Lily bends down, washes her hands, then splashes a little water on her face. The warmth spreads, easing the tightness in her skin. She looks back at the mirror. The glass is hazy now. Her reflection softened, indistinct. And in that moment, Lily feels a small, unexpected smile form. All day long, she's been looking at everything through a similar haze. Not because things had gotten worse, but because she was tired. And when you're tired, everything naturally looks grayer. She reaches for a towel and wipes the mirror. One gentle swipe, then another. The surface clears. The light reflects more cleanly. Not brighter, just truer to what it is. Lily picks up her glasses. The lenses are marked with small smudges, fingerprints, fine dust collected over the course of a long day. She runs them under the water, then dries them carefully with a tissue. When she puts them back on, the room comes into focus again. Not more beautiful, not worse, just clearer. And in that very ordinary moment, Lily realizes something simple all day. She hasn't been seeing life directly. She's been seeing it through her own exhaustion. Sometimes we think we're seeing the truth. Everything is hard. Everyone is difficult. No matter what I do, it's never enough. But sometimes those images are just being tinted by stress and fatigue. Not because we're pessimistic, but because we haven't rested yet. Lily turns off the tap. The bathroom grows quieter. A few drops fall, then stop. She leans lightly against the sink and exhales. Not deeply, not on purpose, just letting the breath leave her body a little more easily. A familiar thought shows up. Tomorrow will probably be the same. Lily doesn't push it away. She looks at it the way she looked at the watermarks on the mirror. It's there, but it doesn't represent the whole picture. She leaves the bathroom and steps into the living room. The warm yellow light fills the space. The room looks the same as it always does. But something inside her feels slightly different. Not because the problems are gone, just because the haze is thinned. If you're listening to this and everything from today feels darker than usual, that's okay. You may not be seeing things wrong. You might just be looking through lenses that have gathered a bit of dust. And tonight, you don't need to fix your life. You only need to gently clean the way you're seeing it. After leaving the bathroom, Lily doesn't turn on any more lights. She keeps the apartment softly lit, as if she doesn't want things to be too sharp or clear right now. She walks slowly through the living room, sets her phone down on the table, and places it face down. Not to avoid anyone, just because there's no need to look at it anymore. She sits on the sofa. The backrest is soft and familiar. As she leans into it, her body seems to remember that it doesn't need to stay upright. Her shoulders release, her neck loosens, her exhale stretches a little longer than it did when she was standing. Lily looks around the room. Familiar objects, the table lamp, the bookshelf, the small plant in the corner. Nothing has changed. And yet tonight they don't feel as heavy as they did when she first came home. Not because they're more beautiful, just because she's looking at them with eyes that are less tired. There's something easy to forget after long days like this. When we're exhausted, we see everything through that exhaustion. Casual words start to sound harsh. Small tasks feel like burdens. And it becomes easy to believe that this is the truth. But sometimes the truth is simply an image viewed through dusty lenses. Lily stands and walks over to the window. She pulls the curtain aside. Outside, the city lights are on, not loud, not dazzling, just scattered squares of light in the dark. She stands there for a moment, not thinking about the people in those rooms, just watching light and shadow exist together like an inhale and an exhale. She realizes she doesn't need to understand anything else tonight. She doesn't need to analyze whether she handled the day well or not. She doesn't need to replay conversations in her head. She only needs to let what she sees come in, and then go without holding on to it. When Lily turns toward the bedroom, she doesn't carry any clear thoughts with her. Just a feeling that's slightly lighter than before. She sits on the edge of the bed and removes her glasses again, placing them on the table. Not because she can't see, but because she doesn't need to see any more right now. Without the glasses, the room softens. Edges blur. The light diffuses, and in that blur, Lily feels at ease. Not everything needs to be clear all the time, especially before sleep. She lies down, the blanket settles over her. Her body finds a familiar position on its own. No special routine, no reminder to relax. Just someone who has reached the end of the day and is allowed to rest. A thought drifts through tomorrow will probably still have a lot to do. Lily doesn't follow it. She doesn't argue with it. She lets it pass like the distant headlights of a car moving down the street. If you're listening to this and recognize how often you see life through a layer of tiredness, that's okay. You don't need to force yourself to see everything more positively. With enough rest, that tint will fade on its own. Tonight doesn't ask you to understand everything. It doesn't ask you to be clear-headed. It only asks you to stop looking at life through eyes that are worn out. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this, that's completely natural. If you're still awake, you're still resting in a safe, quiet space. Everything can be looked at again in the morning. For now, you're allowed to let things stay a little blurry. Listen a little longer, or let sleep arrive whenever it wants to. Morning arrived very early for May. While the city was still asleep, while the streets were quiet and empty, the small kitchen behind her bakery was already lit. Soft white light fell onto the stainless steel counter, reflecting off fine traces of flour left from the day before. The space was calm, filled only with the steady hum of the ventilation fan, like a background breath. May was 37, the owner of a small bakery, used to beginning her days in silence. She washed her hands, dried them, then opened a large bag of flour. As the flour poured into the bowl, a thin white cloud rose and settled almost immediately. She added warm water, yeast, salt. Familiar movements requiring very little thought. There are seasons in life that feel like being underground. No visible progress, no sign of light. Just the sense of being buried, covered over, as if all the effort you've made has disappeared. May was in a season like that. Not because the bakery was failing, not because of any major crisis, just because things had stayed still longer than she'd hoped. She placed her hands into the bowl and began to knead. The dough clung to her palms, soft and warm. With each fold, push, and turn, the dough changed shape very slowly. There was no immediate result, only the patient repetition of the same motion. In May's mind, familiar thoughts drifted through. What if I chose the wrong place? What if all this effort is only burying more time? What if I'm in the dark, not to grow, but to disappear? The questions weren't loud. They arrived steadily like the fan overhead. May didn't try to push them away. Her hands kept kneading. There was something she'd learned over years of baking. Dough needs time in the dark. Yeast needs quiet to do its work. If you pull the dough into the light too soon, if you force it to rise before it's ready, the bread won't have structure. Not because the yeast is weak, but because the time isn't right. She covered the bowl with a cloth and set it aside. The dough rested there silent. There was nothing to show that it was changing. But May knew that inside something very small was happening. Invisible, unheard, but real. She moved to another counter and began weighing ingredients for the next batch. The scale shifted slightly. May adjusted, adding a bit, taking a bit away. There was no perfect number on the first try. Only small corrections, then letting things settle. The darkness in the kitchen wasn't an absence. It was a foundation. It held the temperature steady. It protected fragile things from drying out from shock. May thought of seeds. When a seed is planted in the soil, it doesn't ask when it will see the sun. It doesn't compare itself to other seeds. It does the only thing it knows how to do, split open very slowly in the dark. Some days May wished for clearer signs, a confirmation, a rising number, proof that she wasn't standing still. But then she remembered past batches of bread. Some looked unchanged until the very last moment. Others rose too quickly, only to collapse once they hit the oven. She returned to the bowl and lifted the cloth to check. Nothing dramatic. The surface was still smooth, just slightly more taut. May wasn't disappointed. She covered it again, set a timer, and turned away. In the quiet kitchen, May made herself a cup of tea. Steam rose and dissolved into the cool air. She held the cup with both hands, leaned against the counter, and took a small sip. The taste was gentle, not striking, but enough to linger on her tongue for a moment. Maybe the hardest part of dark seasons is not knowing whether you're being nurtured or buried. And the only comfort is this: from the outside, both states look exactly the same. The difference is that in one of them, life is quietly at work beneath the surface. May set the cup down. The clock on the wall clicked softly, marking a few minutes passing. She didn't rush. She knew she didn't need to watch every second. The most important things don't follow a clock. The kitchen continued its work. The dough continued to rest. And in that just right darkness, something was beginning, even though no one could see it yet. The clock on the wall clicked again softly, like a reminder that time was still moving, even when no one was watching it closely. May set her tea down and returned to the bowl of dough. She lifted the cloth and looked a little longer this time. The surface had risen just slightly. Not much. Just enough to show that it wasn't as still as it had been before. She smiled barely. Not because of a big success, just because of the small confirmation that the process was working. May didn't poke the dough, didn't test it, didn't do anything more. She covered it again, like placing soil back over a seed that had just begun to sprout, letting it continue its work. Some changes only need to be acknowledged, not interfered with. Touching too early often comes from impatience, not care. May had learned that through many failed batches, through many moments of rushing to see results. She turned to preheat the oven. The sound of it starting up was gentle, unhurried. The air in the kitchen slowly warmed. The overhead light fell on familiar surfaces, nothing new, but nothing missing either. These things had supported her for years. May wiped her hands on her apron and leaned back against the counter, letting her body rest for a rare few minutes with nothing that needed doing. In that pause, the thoughts came back. Not as sharp as before, just softer questions. How long until I see results? How long until things feel brighter? She didn't answer them. She let them pass. Darkness, when it isn't resisted, starts to feel like soil. Soil doesn't promise anything. It simply holds. It holds moisture. It holds warmth. It keeps fragile things from drying out. And then when no one is paying attention, it allows life to push upward. May stood and began arranging the baking trays. Slow, steady movements. Nothing urgent. She placed each piece of dough with enough space between them, allowing room to rise without touching. A quiet kind of respect for each loaf's own process. When the final tray slid into the oven, May closed the door and turned the temperature dial. A small click sounded, then silence. Inside the oven, the darkness was deeper, hotter, the place where the dough would transform completely. No one could see it happening, but it was happening all the same. She turned off a few more lights, leaving the kitchen in a softer glow. May sat down on the wooden chair in the corner and closed her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to stop needing to look. Her body relaxed as warmth spread through the room. Maybe not every dark season needs to be understood. Maybe some seasons only need to be trusted. Trusted that if you've planted the seed with enough care and patience, the rest is no longer in your hands. May opened her eyes and looked toward the oven. The light inside glowed faintly through the glass. She didn't stand to check, didn't lean in close. She knew this part didn't need constant watching. Everything had already been placed where it needed to be. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. Distant traffic, another morning arriving. But inside this small kitchen, the rhythm stayed slow, warm, steady. May stood and tidied quietly. She didn't rush to open the oven, didn't rush to see the outcome. She allowed this moment to pass fully. Maybe darkness isn't a sign of failure. Maybe it's simply the necessary pause before something becomes strong enough to meet the light. The kitchen kept breathing. The oven kept working. And May, in that quiet, allowed herself to trust what was growing, even without yet knowing its shape. Some wounds no longer hurt in a sharp way, but they still leave a mark. Not to keep us angry, but to remind us that something once collided there. And sometimes what exhausts us isn't the nail that's been pulled out, but the way we keep standing there, staring at the hole it left behind. Derek was 52, a mechanic used to metal parts and movements that required just the right amount of force. That afternoon, he stood behind his house, where an old wooden fence separated his small yard from the alley behind it. Late sunlight slanted through the fence boards, forming long, narrow streaks of light. The space was quiet, filled only with a light breeze and the smell of freshly cut grass. In Derek's hands were a hammer and a pair of pliers. He wasn't fixing a car today, just tightening a few loose boards. Small, familiar work that didn't ask much thought. He bent down, clamped the pliers around an old nail, and pulled slowly. The metal made a soft sound as it came free from the wood. The nail was out, but the hole was still there. Small, easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Derek brushed his fingers lightly over the edge of it, feeling the rough grain of the wood. It didn't hurt. There was just a faint sense of emptiness. He thought about his most recent apology. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just a sentence spoken after a few days of silence. The other person had nodded, had said, "It's okay." And logically, the matter was settled. But inside him, something hadn't quite smoothed out yet. Derek wasn't someone who held on to things for long. He was used to fixing problems, repairing what was broken, replacing what was worn, tightening things until they were done. But some things once pierced don't return to their original state right away, even after the nail is removed. Not because forgiveness didn't happen, but because the material needs time. He slipped the nail into his pocket and moved on to the next one. Each nail he pulled left behind another small hole in the fence. From a distance, nothing looked different. But Derek knew they were there. Like moments in life that seem resolved, yet still leave faint traces behind. The wind picked up slightly. Derek straightened, stretching his back. His spine gave a quiet pop. He let out a longer breath than usual, not from fatigue, but from noticing something shift. Not everything needs to return to perfect to be considered okay. He bent down and took a thin sliver of wood, tapping it gently into one of the holes with a hammer. The motion was slow and careful. No forcing, no rushing. The new wood didn't match the old exactly, leaving a faint line where the colors met. Derek paused and looked at it. He didn't try to hide it. He just made it sturdier. Some apologies don't erase the mark, but they can soften the edges. They make the place less sharp, less likely to hurt when brushed against. And maybe that's enough for now. Derek set the hammer aside and sat down on the back step. The sunlight softened. The yard settled into a warm, golden tone. From this distance, the small holes in the fence weren't so noticeable anymore. They hadn't disappeared, but they no longer filled his entire view. He thought about how he used to wish everything could go back to the way it was, as if nothing had happened. But life doesn't work that way. Life gives us marks, then teaches us how to live with them, without letting them decide the whole story. Derek rested his hands on his knees. His palms were dusted with fine wood shavings. He didn't brush them off right away. He just felt them there. There was a quiet kind of ease in accepting that some gaps don't need to vanish for us to finally rest. The fence stood there, not perfect, but solid. And in the last light of the day, Derek saw that he was much the same. As the sun dropped lower, the light behind the house began to change. The pale gold faded, stretched, then dissolved into shadow. Derek stayed seated on the back step, not because he was tired, but because there was no need to stand up right away. Sometimes the body knows on its own that there's nothing urgent left to do. He looked at the fence again. From this distance, the small holes were barely visible. They were still there, but they didn't ask for attention. Derek realized that for a long time, he had been standing too close to the marks inside himself. So close that he forgot how different things look when you step back just a little. He stood up, brushed the wood dust from his hands, and carried the tools into the shed. The door closed with a solid, familiar sound. A simple end to the workday. Nothing ceremonial, just putting things back where they belonged. Inside the house, the air was quieter. Derek washed his hands at the utility sink, cool water rinsing away the smell of metal and sawdust. He let the water run a few seconds longer than necessary, not because it had to, but because it felt good. When he turned it off, his hands felt cleaner, lighter, as if a thin layer of tension had been rinsed away too. He went into the living room and turned on a small lamp. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't play the radio. Those sounds could wait. Tonight, the quiet felt complete on its own. Derek sat down, leaned back, and let the chair fully support his weight. The memory of the apology no longer felt sharp in his mind. Not because it had been erased, but because he wasn't staring straight at it anymore. Some words have already been spoken. some marks simply need time to soften. Both can be true without canceling each other out. Derek thought about how he used to rush to fill every gap right away, as if not doing so meant everything might fall apart. But the fence was still standing, even with its imperfections. And so was he. Some places that had once been hurt were now just faint traces, no longer sharp the way they had been at first. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom. His steps were slow and steady. Nothing was pulling him to hurry. When he lay down, he didn't search for the perfect position. He just rested the way his body wanted to. The blanket settled over his shoulders. The temperature was just right. Small details that became clearer once his mind stopped working so hard. Derek's breath moved in, then out naturally. No counting. No adjusting. Each breath felt like a quiet reminder from his body that things were okay enough. He didn't need to be completely healed in order to rest. Some nights what we need isn't to erase every mark from yesterday. We just need to know they no longer hurt when we touch them. They can remain as part of the surface without still being sharp nails. If tomorrow, when the light returns, Derek notices the small holes in the fence again, he doesn't need to fix them right away. They aren't threatening anything. They simply remind him that there was once an impact and that there was also an effort to soften it. The room slowly settled into silence. No conclusion, no promises. Just a man who had stopped standing so close to old nail marks and a body allowed to rest within its own imperfect wholeness. And in that very gentle acceptance, sleep arrived without needing a name. Like letting the wood be what it is instead of asking it to become what it once was before the nail. The garage smelled like oil, and old metal, a kind of smell that never really leaves, no matter how many times you clean. Derek liked that about it. It felt honest. Nothing pretending to be new. He stood near the workbench with his sleeves rolled up, hands dark with grease. The overhead light casting a dull yellow circle onto the concrete floor. The shop was closed for the night. No engines running, no radios playing, just the quiet hum of the light and the faint ticking sound of cooling metal. Derek was 52, a mechanic most of his life. The kind who could listen to an engine for 10 seconds and know where the problem lived. People trusted him with their cars, with their safety. They didn't know how often he questioned himself when the garage door rolled down at the end of the day. He picked up a rag and wiped his hands slowly, not trying to get them perfectly clean. Some stains stayed no matter what you did. He'd learned not to fight that. Earlier that afternoon, a customer had made an offhand comment. Nothing cruel, just careless. Something about getting older, about how long guys like you keep doing this kind of work. Derek had laughed it off. He always did. But the words had followed him into the evening, settling somewhere behind his ribs. He leaned his hip against the bench and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The garage felt different at night, less demanding, more forgiving. During the day, everything was about fixing, adjusting, restoring things to how they were supposed to be. At night, nothing asked to be repaired. Derek's eyes drifted to a block of stone sitting in the corner, half covered with a tarp. It had been there for months. a leftover from a project he never finished. He hadn't planned on keeping it. It just stayed. He walked over and pulled the tarp back. The stone was rough, uneven edges chipped. To anyone else, it probably looked like a mistake, a failed start, something abandoned halfway through. Derek ran his hand over the surface. Cool, solid, unapologetic. Years ago, when his kids were still young, he'd taken them to a museum on a rare day off. He remembered standing in front of a sculpture, massive and calm, carved from a single block of stone. One of his kids had asked how the artist knew what it would look like before starting. The guide had smiled and said the sculpture was already there. The artist just removed what didn't belong. That line had stayed with Derek longer than he expected. At the time, he'd thought it sounded poetic. Now, standing alone in his garage, it felt uncomfortably personal. Derek thought about his own life, the things that had chipped away at him over the years, long hours, missed moments, mistakes he replayed more often than he admitted, words he wished he'd said differently, paths he hadn't taken because responsibility had come first. Sometimes it felt like life had taken a hammer to him without asking, like he'd been worn down instead of shaped. He rested his forehead briefly against the cool stone and closed his eyes. Not in defeat, just in acknowledgement. What if the years hadn't been punishing him? What if they had been revealing him? The thought didn't land easily. It pushed against something tight in his chest. Derek wasn't used to being gentle with himself. He respected effort, endurance, getting through. But gentleness had always felt like something you earned later, if at all. He stepped back and looked at the stone again, this time with different eyes. It wasn't unfinished. It was becoming. The marks on its surface told a story of pressure resistance time. None of that made it worthless. None of it meant it had failed. Derek wiped his hands again and hung the rag on a hook by the door. He turned off the overhead light, leaving only a small lamp on near the bench. The garage slipped into shadow edges, softening expectations, fading with the brightness. He sat down on an old stool and let his shoulders drop forward. The day drained out of him slowly, like oil settling after an engine shuts down. His breathing deepened without instruction. So much of his regret came from believing he should look different by now, more polished, more certain, less marked by wear. But stone doesn't apologize for its marks. It carries them as proof of process. Derek stayed there, surrounded by quiet, letting that idea exist without trying to turn it into wisdom. Just a possibility. A softer way to see the same life. The stone waited patiently in the corner, unchanged, unbothered by the hour. And for the first time in a long while, Derek didn't feel the need to fix what he was seeing. Derek stayed on the stool longer than he expected. The small lamp cast a low amber light across the garage, turning sharp edges into softer shapes. The stone in the corner no longer looked heavy. It simply looked present, as if it had always belonged there. He noticed how different the space felt when nothing needed to be repaired. During the day, every sound in the garage meant something was wrong. At night, the quiet meant things were allowed to rest exactly as they were. Derek leaned back slightly and let his hands rest on his thighs. The grease under his nails no longer bothered him. It felt like evidence, not dirt. Proof of a life spent working, showing up, doing what needed to be done, even when it wasn't glamorous. For years he had carried the belief that wear meant decline. That every mark on his body, every line on his face, every regret in his memory was a sign that something had gone off course. But the stone didn't see it that way. It had been shaped by pressure, not ruined by it. The thought settled in him slowly, without resistance. He didn't need to rewrite his past. He didn't need to forgive himself all at once. He only needed to stop treating his own history like a failure. Derek stood up and walked back to the stone, placing both hands on its surface again. He didn't imagine a finished form inside it. He didn't plan a next step. He simply felt the cool weight beneath his palms and let that be enough. Life, he realized, wasn't a process of becoming someone else. It was a process of uncovering what had been there from the beginning, beneath expectations, mistakes, and years of trying to be useful. He covered the stone again with the tarp, not to hide it, but to let it wait. Some things didn't need to be rushed into completion. Some things were allowed to remain unfinished for a while longer. Derek turned off the lamp and closed the garage door behind him. The click of the lock echoed briefly, then disappeared into the night. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. The street was quiet the way it gets when most people have gone to bed. As he walked toward the house, his steps felt heavier in a good way, grounded. The ache in his back didn't vanish, but it didn't feel like an enemy either. It was simply part of the body that had carried him this far. Inside, he washed his hands at the sink, watching the water darken and then clear again. He didn't scrub hard. He let the oil lift gradually, leaving faint traces behind. Not everything had to be erased. He turned off the kitchen light and made his way to the bedroom, letting the house stay dim. The bed welcomed him without ceremony. He lay down and let his arms fall where they did, chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. The image of the stone returned once more, not as a metaphor, but as a feeling. Solid, patient, shaped by time, not broken by it. Derek felt his thoughts slow, then thin. The regrets that usually circled at night didn't find much to hold on to. There was nothing to fix right now, nothing to prove, nothing to correct. Somewhere between one breath and the next, a quiet understanding settled in. Life hadn't been trying to destroy him. It had been working with what was there, removing what didn't belong, revealing what did. The sculptor doesn't create the stone. He listens to it. Derek listened now to his own body, to the quiet of the house, to the simple fact of being here. The day loosened its grip. The years softened around the edges. And in the dark, with no tools in his hands and no expectations pressing in, he allowed himself to rest as he was already shaped, already enough, still becoming. Sometimes the problem isn't that things are too complicated. It's that we're in a hurry. We want everything untangled right away. We want our minds to feel clear immediately. We want the discomfort to disappear as fast as possible. And that urgency is often what makes everything more tangled. Chloe is 22 years old. She works retail at a large store. Her shift ends close to 10 at night. When she gets back to her room, she drops into a chair, kicks off her shoes, and pulls her earbuds out of her jacket pocket. The cord is twisted into a small knot, familiar somehow, always like this. Chloe frowns. She tugs gently at one end. Nothing happens. She pulls a little harder. The knot tightens. She exhales sharply, a bit irritated. Why is it always like this? It's a small sentence, but it carries the weight of the whole day. She stands up and paces a few steps around the room, the tangled earbuds still in her hand. Her mind feels just as knotted. A comment from her manager, a difficult customer. A familiar thought slips in. Maybe I'm just not very good at this. The thoughts hook into each other. The more she pulls on them, the tighter they feel. Chloe sits down on the bed. She lets the earbuds fall onto the mattress. She stops pulling. She just looks. Under the warm yellow light, the cord becomes clearer. It isn't one impossible mess. It's just many small loops caught together. She uses 2 fingers to lift a section of the cord, turns it slightly, then sets it back down. Slowly. With no goal of fixing everything at once. Just testing one spot. One small loop loosens. Not much, but enough that the whole knot isn't as tight as before. There's something Chloe knows well, even if she rarely puts it into words. When her mind feels tangled, she tries to solve it fast. Find the right answer. Make a decision immediately. Get clarity now. But just like the earbuds, some things don't respond to force. Pulling harder doesn't move them forward, it just tightens the knot. She keeps going. Lift, turn, set down. No yanking, no tugging. When one loop refuses to budge, she leaves it alone and moves to another place. Strangely, when she stops focusing on the tightest knot, other parts begin to loosen on their own. As she works, her thoughts slow down too. They don't disappear, but they stop crowding each other. She's no longer replaying her manager's words. Not because she's resolved them, but because her hands are busy with something slow enough to bring her back to the present moment. At some point, Chloe notices her shoulders have dropped. Her neck feels less tight. Her exhales are steadier. Small changes, but real ones. She isn't trying to relax. She simply stopped rushing. Some problems in our minds are exactly like this tangle of earbuds. Not impossible to fix, just impossible to fix with force. They need patience more than determination, and sometimes the biggest step is simply stopping the hard pull. Chloe sets the earbuds down and stretches her hands. She looks out the window. Streetlights reflect off the wet sidewalk below. A car passes, then fades into the distance. Nothing out there is asking anything of her. She turns back to the earbuds. Another loop loosens. Then another. There's no moment where everything is suddenly done. Just a knot that's slowly becoming easier to breathe around, much like her mind right now. If you're listening to this and recognize how often you try to untangle your thoughts too quickly, that's okay. Many people do. But tonight you might not need to pull so hard. You can set things down and loosen them one small step at a time. At some point, Chloe notices the room has grown quieter. Not because all sound has disappeared, but because nothing is pulling her attention too far away anymore. The wall clock ticks steadily. Traffic outside is thinned. The warm yellow light in the room hasn't changed, but the way she feels inside has. The earbuds on the bed are no longer tightly knotted like they were at first. There are still a few small loops tangled together, but they don't irritate her anymore. Chloe lifts one end of the cord, lets the rest fall softly onto the mattress. She doesn't pull. She just raises it, turns her wrist slightly, then sets it down again. Another loop loosens on its own. She realizes she doesn't need to untangle everything right now. The earbuds already work. The rest can wait. That realization feels much lighter than the pressure of having to finish it all. A familiar thought flickers through her mind. I always leave things unfinished. This time Chloe doesn't react. She doesn't blame herself. She doesn't argue back. She lets the thought drift by like a thin strand of wire that no longer catches on anything. She coils the earbuds loosely, not trying to make them neat, just enough to place them in the drawer. When her hand closes the drawer, it feels like she's set down one more thing from the day. Chloe stands and walks into the bathroom. She washes her hands with warm water. The feeling of water running between her fingers helps her notice how tired her hands actually are. Not from heavy work, but from gripping too tightly for too long. As the soap rinses away, her fingers relax on their own. She looks at herself in the mirror, not searching for flaws, not judging, just looking. Someone who's made it through a long day and is learning not to pull so hard at everything anymore. Back in her room, Chloe turns off the main light, leaving only the small lamp by the bed. She sits down, pulls the blanket up to her thighs, then lies back fully. The bed supports her body. She doesn't need to balance herself. She doesn't need to think any further. Some nights, the best thing you can do for yourself isn't to solve every tangle, but to stop making them tighter. No pulling, no yanking, no forcing clarity. If there are still a few loose wires in your mind, that's okay. They don't need to be untangled before sleep. They can stay right where they are, harmless, as long as you don't keep pulling on them. Chloe turns onto her side. Her breathing slows. Not perfectly even, but comfortable. She isn't thinking about tomorrow. She isn't thinking about her next shift. She lets her body do what it already knows how to do: rest. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this story, that's completely fine. If you're still awake, you're still moving in a very safe rhythm. You don't need to untangle everything. You don't need full clarity. You only need to release the force and let things stay as they are. Listen a little longer, or drift off whenever you'd like. Winter doesn't always arrive with snow. Sometimes it comes as cold wind slipping through your collar, as gray skies that linger for days, as the quiet sense that everything has slowed down without any announcement. Holly stood at the bus stop, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. It was already dark earlier than in other seasons. Streetlights flickered on their pale yellow glow, reflecting off the damp pavement. The wind wasn't strong, but it was enough to let the cold creep into every small opening. Holly was 33, a nursing assistant used to taking care of others. Her shift had ended late, her body tired, her mind empty in that specific way that comes from giving too much of yourself in one day. She stood still, not stamping her feet for warmth, not checking her phone. just standing there, letting time pass in the cold. The bus stop was quiet. A few people stood spaced apart just far enough. No one spoke. Only the wind and the distant sound of passing cars. Holly breathed out. A thin cloud of vapor appeared, then disappeared almost instantly. She watched it, then let her eyes rest. Some seasons in life feel like a long winter. Not because something is wrong, but because nothing is growing. No clear progress. No sign that warmth is on its way. And what exhausts people most isn't the cold itself, but the fear that it might never end. Holly thought about the past few months. Shift after shift. Coming home after dark, waking up to gray mornings. She wasn't sad in a dramatic way, just quietly worn down like ground that's been frozen for too long. She wrapped her scarf tighter and pulled her sleeves down. A natural reflex. Protection. Warmth. In the cold, the body knows what to do, even when the mind hasn't caught up yet. The bus hadn't arrived. The digital sign blinked, showing a few more minutes. Holly didn't check it again. A few minutes or 10 wouldn't change anything. She stood there listening to her breathing, which grew steadier once she stopped trying to warm herself by constant movement. Someone walked past, leaving behind the faint smell of a damp coat. A car splashed through a puddle, sending up a few drops. The city kept living through its winter, without complaining, without apologizing. Holly remembered past winters. Some had been long, some had felt endless. And yet somehow, they had passed. Not in a single day. Not with a dramatic sign. Just one morning when the light felt slightly different. The wind less sharp. And she realized she'd made it through the coldest part. She slipped a hand into her coat pocket and touched her knitted gloves. She didn't put them on yet, just touched them. The softness eased the numbness in her fingers a little. A very small warmth, but real. There are fears that whisper, what if it stays like this forever? What if I've gone too far into winter? But winter doesn't ask for answers. It only asks to be walked through one day at a time. Holly looked up at the sky. No stars, just a deep gray stretch. She didn't search for signs of spring in this night. She didn't need to. Night isn't meant to promise anything. It only needs to be quiet enough to stand within. The bus appeared at the end of the street, its white headlights cutting through the dark. It arrived neither sooner nor later than expected. It arrived when it arrived. Holly stepped on, tapped her card, and found a seat near the window. The seat was cold at first, then slowly warmed. She leaned her head against the glass. Her breath fogged a small patch. Outside, the scenery moved past, slowly blurred. Holly didn't try to see it clearly. She didn't need to know exactly where she was passing, only that she was moving. There's something strange about winter, even when everything looks still. Something is always flowing underneath, like roots beneath frozen soil, like water moving under ice, unseen but never stopped. Holly closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to stop meeting the cold with her gaze. As the bus warmed, her body loosened slightly. Maybe this winter wasn't over yet. Maybe it would last a while longer. But that didn't mean it was all there would ever be. The bus moved on at a steady pace, the low hum of the engine like a large heartbeat, keeping the space from falling too quiet. Holly leaned against the window. Her breath fogged the glass once more, then slowly faded. She didn't wipe it away. She let the mark disappear on its own, the way many things in life do when they aren't held on to. Outside streetlights passed one by one. Light brushed her face, then slid away, never staying long. Holly didn't count them, didn't track them. She let her eyes rest, letting her body be carried without having to stay alert. As the bus warmed, her shoulders dropped, not because she decided to relax, but because the cold that had made her hold herself tight at the stop was no longer pressing in the same way. Some kinds of letting go happen naturally when the conditions change. Holly thought of winter as a necessary pause. No one chooses it. No one schedules it. But when it comes, the body adapts, adding layers, slowing down, staying closer to warmth. Maybe the mind needs similar things. Not big solutions, just small adjustments that make it possible to get through. She remembered a morning from years ago when winter had just begun to turn into spring. There hadn't been dramatic melting, just a shift in light, windows that felt less cold to the touch. And she had known, without needing proof, that the hardest part was behind her. The bus turned onto a familiar street. Holly opened her eyes and looked out. Low houses, windows glowing. Somewhere someone was cooking dinner. Someone else was sitting quietly after a long day. Each home held its own rhythm, no need to match another. She slipped a hand into her pocket, touched her gloves again, then pulled them out and put them on. This time it wasn't because she was too cold. It was because she wanted the warmth more clearly. A small choice, but enough. The fear that winter might never end was no longer standing right in front of her. It hadn't disappeared, but it had stepped back. Winter might still be here, but it wasn't the whole picture. The bus stopped. Holly stood and stepped down. The air outside was colder than inside the bus, but it didn't shock her the way it had earlier. Her body had adjusted. She pulled her scarf up and walked slowly toward home. The porch light turned on as she approached. A small circle of light opened in the darkness. Holly paused for a moment, breathing in, then out. This breath wasn't rushed. It didn't need to be. Some seasons don't ask us to be strong. They only ask us to keep going, to stay warm enough, not to go numb, and to trust that the light will change when it's time. Holly opened the door and stepped inside. The space was warmer, quieter. She took off her coat, hung it up, set her bag down. Familiar movements, gentle ones, like a ritual of bringing her body back home. Outside, winter continued doing its work. But inside this small house, there was warmth enough to rest. And sometimes, one warm space is all it takes to make it through a season. Holly turned off a few lights and walked toward her bedroom. The night didn't ask her to see spring yet. It only asked her to rest so that when spring did arrive, she would still have the strength to notice it. Some anger doesn't come from a big event. It comes from telling a small story too many times. Each time we retell it, we throw another dry branch into the fire. The fire doesn't explode on its own. It simply does what the wood allows it to do. Kevin was 37, an accountant used to tidy numbers and workdays that ended on time. But that evening he got home later than usual. Not because of extra work, just a meeting that ran 10 minutes long, followed by a comment that seemed harmless, said right as everyone stood up to leave. Kevin didn't react then. He smiled lightly, nodded, packed his things. Everything stayed polite. But once he got home, kicked off his shoes by the door, the anger began to take clearer shape. Not loud, just hot. He went straight into the bathroom and turned on the shower. Hot water poured over his shoulders, steam quickly fogging the mirror. The space closed in, leaving only the steady sound of water washing out everything else. Kevin stood there with his eyes closed, letting the water hit his back, the usual end-of-day routine. In his mind, the meeting replayed. Every sentence, every look. Kevin thought about what he should have said, how he should have answered, how he should have clarified things right then. Each should was another dry branch tossed into the fire. The flame didn't flare up immediately, but it grew a little hotter. The water kept running. The steam thickened. Kevin pressed a hand against the tiled wall, warm under his palm. He noticed his jaw was clenched. His shoulders were lifted higher than normal. His body was reacting to a conversation that had already ended. He opened his eyes and looked at the blurred mirror. The reflection was vague, just a figure standing still in the steam. And it hit him. The event was over. But in his head, it was still happening. Edited, expanded, repeated. Sometimes we think we're processing anger by thinking it through, but often we're just feeding it. Every branch is dry because it comes from memory. And memory, when pulled out again and again, catches fire easily. Kevin adjusted the shower, letting the water turn slightly cooler. Not much, just enough to feel the difference. The steam began to thin. The fire in his chest didn't grow anymore. It paused, waiting. He tried something else. He didn't keep retelling the story. He didn't argue in his head. He didn't prepare imaginary responses. He just stood there with the water, with his breath, with a body that was heating up, then slowly cooling down. This felt different from holding it in. It felt like not throwing anything else into the fire. For a few seconds, a kind of quiet appeared. Not outside, but inside. Not a big empty space, just a small opening where the anger wasn't being fed. Kevin noticed that without new wood, the fire changed. It was still there, but it wasn't sharp anymore. He turned off the shower and stepped out, wrapping a towel around himself. Cool air touched his skin clearly. Kevin breathed in, then out. Not deep, not long. Just enough to notice his chest wasn't tight anymore. In the mirror, his reflection slowly came back as the steam faded. Nothing special, no look of triumph. Just someone who had stopped in the middle before the fire could spread. Kevin dried his hair and hung the towel on the hook. Familiar motions, steady, thoughtless. In his mind, the meeting story wasn't running anymore. It still existed, but it wasn't being told. Like embers cooling once no one stirs them. He stepped out into the living room. The light was soft. The space was quiet. Kevin sat down and felt his body sink slightly in a comfortable way. Not exhausted, just no longer tense. Some nights what drains us isn't the first spark of anger. It's all the dry wood we add afterward, believing we're making things clearer. But fire doesn't need clarity. It only needs fuel. Kevin leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. The fire inside him wasn't completely out, but it wasn't being fed anymore. And that alone was enough for the evening to begin to soften. Kevin sat quietly on the sofa. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't pick up his phone. The room was lit only by the soft yellow glow of a lamp in the corner. This space didn't ask him to react, to keep thinking, or to prepare for anything. It simply allowed him to be still. The anger from earlier hadn't disappeared completely. It was still there like glowing embers after the flames have pulled back. But when Kevin didn't stare at it, didn't poke at it, it began to cool on its own. No water needed, no force, just time and quiet. He stood up, went into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. The sound of water filling the glass was barely audible. Kevin drank in slow sips, feeling his throat soften. Sometimes bringing attention back to the body is the fastest way to stop the mind from spinning. Back on the sofa, Kevin stretched his legs out in front of him. The backrest supported his weight. His shoulders dropped lower than before, his jaw unclenched. Small signs, but his body noticed immediately. It knew when it no longer needed to stay on guard. In Kevin's mind, the meeting from earlier appeared only faintly now. No clear sentences, no chain of imagined replies. When a story isn't repeated, it shortens on its own, like a fire without wood, first dim red, then gray. He realized something very simple. Not every thought needs to be followed all the way through to be considered processed. Some thoughts finish their work the moment we stop feeding them. Kevin walked into the bedroom. No rush, no phone in hand. He turned on a small lamp just enough to see. As he sat on the bed, he felt the difference between now and when he'd first come home. His body felt heavier in a comforting way, no longer tight like a drawn string. He lay down and pulled the blanket up to his shoulders. The temperature was just right. The room was cool and still. Kevin turned onto his side, finding his familiar position. No thought jumped up demanding to be resolved. What remained was only a faint afterglow, like warmth lingering in a kitchen after cooking is done. Some anger doesn't need to be overcome. It just needs to stop being retold. When the story ends, the fire no longer knows where to burn. Kevin closed his eyes. He didn't force himself to sleep. He let his eyelids grow heavy. His breath moved in then out, steady and even. Each breath felt like a small pause between the remaining thoughts. And in those pauses, his body did what it knows how to do. If tomorrow, when he remembers that meeting, the anger rises again just a little, Kevin knows he'll recognize the familiar moment. This is where I'm about to throw in more wood. And just like tonight, he can choose not to. Not because he's weak, but because it isn't necessary. The room slowly settled into silence. No conclusions, no promises. Just a fire no longer being fed and a body returning to its safe, natural state. And in that quiet sleep arrived naturally, like the last embers finally cooling, leaving just enough warmth to keep the night from feeling cold. Carla noticed the crack while she was washing dishes. It wasn't new. That was the strange part. The small ceramic bowl had been chipped for a long time, a thin line running from the rim down one side, like a quiet scar. She had used it dozens of times without really seeing it. Tonight, under the warm kitchen light, it caught her attention. She slowed her hands in the sink, letting the water run over the bowl. The crack darkened slightly as it filled, then lightened again as the water drained away. The sound of the faucet was steady, familiar, the kind of sound that made the rest of the house feel calmer. Carla was 48 and worked as a hairstylist. All day she stood behind people adjusting smoothing, making small corrections so others could leave feeling more put together than when they arrived. She was good at it. She had learned how to notice tiny details and fix them gently without drawing attention to the flaw. It rarely occurred to her to do the same for herself. She turned the bowl in her hands, studying the crack more closely now. It wasn't jagged. It didn't threaten to break apart. It simply existed, part of the bowl's shape, part of its history. Earlier that evening, a client had laughed and said, "You're so confident, I wish I was more like you." Carla had smiled and changed the subject the way she always did. Confidence felt like the wrong word. She felt capable, yes, reliable, but confident implied something unbroken, something smooth. Carla set the bowl in the drying rack and reached for a towel. As she dried her hands, her eyes drifted to the stack of mismatched dishes on the counter. None of them were perfect. Small chips, faded patterns, items collected over years rather than chosen all at once. She had always liked it that way. A kitchen that looked lived in. And yet, when it came to herself, she held a different standard. She noticed every crack, every place where she felt she should have healed faster, known better, been stronger by now. The faucet clicked off. The kitchen settled into a deeper quiet, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock above the fridge. Carla leaned her hip against the counter and let her shoulders relax forward. She thought about the word flawed, how easily it attached itself to people. How often she had described herself that way in her own head, as if a crack automatically meant something was damaged beyond use. Carla picked the bowl up again and held it at eye level. The light caught the glaze unevenly along the crack, creating a faint line of reflection. It wasn't ugly. If anything, it made the bowl more interesting, more honest. She remembered something she had read years ago about old pottery in Japan. How cracks were sometimes repaired with gold, not to hide the break, but to highlight it. The idea had stayed with her, even if she couldn't remember the name for it. The bowl in her hands hadn't been repaired with gold. No one had tried to make the crack beautiful. And still, it held water. It held food. It did exactly what it was meant to do. Carla felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the kind that came when she thought about her own past. Relationships that hadn't lasted. Choices she replayed late at night, the quiet belief that if she were less marked, life would have gone more smoothly. She set the bowl back down carefully and rested both palms on the counter. The surface was cool, solid, trustworthy. She took a slow breath and let it out without shaping it. What if being whole didn't mean being uncracked? What if it simply meant being able to hold what life placed inside you? The thought didn't demand an answer. It stayed there like the bowl on the counter waiting to be noticed. Carla turned off the kitchen light and left the room dim, letting the glow from the living room spill in instead. The crack in the bowl was harder to see now, but she knew it was still there. And for the first time that evening, that didn't feel like a problem. Carla left the kitchen and moved into the living room, not turning on any more lights. The house felt different in the dimness, softer, less demanding. Shadows settled into corners without being asked to explain themselves. She sat down on the couch and let her back sink into the cushions, arms resting where they fell. The image of the bowl stayed with her, not as a symbol she needed to analyze, but as a quiet presence, something ordinary that had done its job without pretending to be untouched. She thought about how often she had treated her own life as if it were supposed to look unused. No visible wear, no chips, no signs that anything had ever pressed too hard. And when the marks showed up anyway, she'd taken them as evidence of failure instead of evidence of living. Carla crossed her legs and leaned her head back against the couch. The fabric was worn smooth in places, shaped by years of use. She liked that about it. It held her without trying to impress her. She remembered moments she usually avoided thinking about. Times she had trusted too much, stayed too long, left too early. None of them felt sharp tonight. They felt distant, like old weather that had already passed through. The bowl hadn't cracked because it was weak. It had cracked because it had been used, held heat, held weight, been part of countless small moments that mattered enough to leave a trace. Carla felt something ease in her chest as that understanding settled. She didn't need to repair herself to be acceptable. She didn't need to hide the places where life had pressed in. Those places didn't cancel her usefulness. They explained it. She stood up and walked back into the kitchen, drawn there without urgency. The bowl sat quietly in the drying rack, a thin line visible along its side. Carla lifted it again, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. It was steady, reliable. She filled it with water and carried it carefully to the sink. The bowl held the water without leaking, without protest. The crack didn't compromise its purpose. It simply told a story. Carla set the bowl down and turned off the remaining light. The kitchen faded into shadow, leaving only the faint outline of shapes she knew well. She didn't need to see everything clearly to trust it. In the bedroom, she changed into something soft and loose movements, slow, unhurried. The mirror caught her reflection briefly. She didn't look away. She didn't search for flaws. She just saw a woman who had been shaped by years of showing up. Carla lay down and pulled the blanket over herself, letting the weight settle across her shoulders. Her breathing slowed naturally, without direction. The day began to loosen its hold. She thought again of the pottery repaired with gold, the way cracks were honored instead of hidden. Not because suffering was beautiful, but because survival was honest. Maybe wholeness wasn't about returning to an unmarked state. Maybe it was about holding everything past present memory without falling apart. Carla felt her thoughts grow quieter, edges blurring. The crack no longer felt like something that needed attention. It simply existed, integrated, complete in its own way. The house rested around her, familiar and imperfect. The night moved forward without expectation. Somewhere the bowl waited in the kitchen, ready to be used again tomorrow. Carla closed her eyes, allowing herself to rest, without fixing, without correcting, without pretending to be unbroken. Nothing needed to be repaired tonight. Nothing needed to be hidden. She drifted toward sleep whole, not because she was flawless, but because she was still here, still holding still enough. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.